Florida's Surgeon General recently called for a halt in COVID vaccines due to safety questions, while the federal government continues to heavily promote them for adults and kids alike. Today, we begin with a little-told story about COVID vaccine injuries. It's the story of Maddie, one of the children who took part in Pfizer's vaccine study on children. It's a remarkable account of what happened when Maddie got very, very sick, leading to accusations that Pfizer, the FDA, and the study leaders tried to bury her case.
All three of my kids were in the Pfizer clinical trial for 12 to 15-year-olds at Cincinnati Children's.
In summer of 2020, Stephanie DeGarry and her family learned an important clinical trial was about to be launched at nearby Cincinnati Children's Hospital. It would test Pfizer's experimental COVID-19 vaccine on 12 to 15-year-olds to see if it was safe and effective. The DeGarrys, firmly pro-vaccine, didn't hesitate to let their children take part. Among three siblings, 12-year-old Maddie alone was chosen to get 2 doses of Pfizer's vaccine rather than a harmless placebo. It proved a fateful and debilitating roll of the dice.
Her second dose was January 20th of 2021, and that was my son's 16th birthday, literally the day. I have a picture of the three of them on that day. That night, in the middle of the night, that's when it all started. So it was maybe, let's just say 12 hours after her second dose.
What kinds of things did she wake up with, or was she suffering?
She just came in and asked if she could sleep in our bedroom, which was not normal. She said, "I don't feel right. Can I sleep in your room?" So she slept in between us, so very odd. And then in the morning, she ended up going to school just because she hates missing school, because then you have to make up the work. So by the time she came home from school, my husband called me at work and said, "Maddie's having some sort of reaction." She had what she described as electrical shocks going up and down her spine. She said she felt like her heart was being ripped out. So chest pain. She had severe abdominal pain. She was hunched over when she walked through the door. Her toes and her fingers were white, and they were like, when you touched them, they were ice cold and painful.
Did you think right away that this was probably a vaccine reaction?
100%. There was nothing wrong with her prior to that.
Before long, Maddie lost feeling in her legs. Here, she's scooting on the floor and using her hands to lift her legs. DeGarry says she was shocked when the lead study doctor offered no help. She found herself reluctantly following the advice of physicians who insisted Maddie's paralysis, seizures, passing out, all of it were caused by anxiety.
I'm embarrassed how much I was brainwashed and believed them. She did cognitive behavioral therapy, which is seeing a psychologist.
At what point did you think to yourself, I've tried what they said, I know my daughter's not suffering a psychological event?
I always had in the back of my mind, I knew that it wasn't. So when she was in her hospital stay in April, they treated her horribly. Like, they treated her like a crazy person. And at that point, I knew, plus she wasn't getting better.
Maddie was rushed to the ER 9 times. By the time she was hospitalized for the 3rd time, she had heart problems, seizures, was passing out, vomiting, unable to swallow, and was fed through a tube. She was in the hospital that time for a month and a half.
Hey, welcome back.
I need to take this out.
Okay.
Studies are conducted to identify and investigate any health risks. Maddie's reaction was a giant red flag for Pfizer's vaccine. But the DeGarrys say those involved seem more interested in blaming Maddie's illnesses on anything but the obvious culprit. While Maddie was fighting for her life, the FDA granted emergency use of Pfizer's vaccine for kids as young as age 12, based on the study Maddie took part in. In a press release, Pfizer reported its vaccine had a favorable safety profile observed across 6 months of safety follow-up data after the second dose. No mention of what happened to Maddie. Parents across the country started rushing to get their children the heavily promoted shots.
You were super duper today, getting your COVID vaccine, Elmo.
Yeah, there was a little pinch, but that was okay.
I took a trip up there to the North Pole. I went there and I vaccinated Santa Claus myself.
It sounds like you have the sense that government slash the drug company and study folks did not want to acknowledge this as a vaccine adverse event.
No, they did not.
And you feel they were not honest about the reporting of her case?
They left out a lot of information. They reported it as functional abdominal pain, so that's basically a stomach ache that you can't explain.
Congress, heavily funded by pharmaceutical industry donations, has avoided the subject of vaccine injuries for years. There were no official hearings on COVID vaccine side effects. In November of 2021, Maddie and her mother appeared at an expert panel held by Senator Ron Johnson.
I've got a quick question. Obviously, we invited the CEO from Pfizer or some representative from Pfizer. Nobody showed up. Pfizer has to be aware of you. Have they reached out to you?
Neither Pfizer, the FDA, or the CDC has ever talked to us or attempted to. We have never heard anything from them.
By then, COVID vaccines have been given to young people for 6 months, with sometimes tragic results. Carrie Peterson Edberg's son Milo got the shot in December of 2021 and ended up with a serious heart problem that's associated with COVID vaccines.
He got vaccinated on like a Friday, and on Sunday, Sunday morning at 1 a.m. was on life support. He was diagnosed with myocarditis. Doctors, of course, would not say it was vax injured, but why would a 6-year-old have myocarditis?
Daniel Hartman's 17-year-old son was rushed to the hospital 4 days after his shot in September of 2021.
My son Sean played hockey his whole life. To continue to play hockey, he had to get a vaccine. He took one Pfizer shot and died 33 days later.
And 16-year-old Ernesto, son of single parent Ernest Ramirez, dropped dead of an enlarged heart 5 days after his Pfizer COVID shot.
When I got there, they were loading him up in the ambulance. I changed the ambulance to the hospital. When I got there, they were working on him at the hospital. And there was a young doctor. He came out. He goes, "Your son's dead. You can go home."
The DeGarys gave the government and those who experimented on Maddie permission to talk with us about her case. However, Pfizer, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and lead study scientist Dr. Robert Frank declined comment and wouldn't answer our questions. Same with CDC, which also wouldn't tell us how many adverse event reports in children it's received for COVID vaccines. The FDA told Full Measure, the FDA takes vaccine safety very seriously and continues to monitor reports of all adverse events.
We have nurses that come in, so they're late.
Left to their own devices, Maddie's parents began doing research to try to figure out what was really wrong.
In July of 2022, we saw a neurologist that specializes in autoimmune reactions that cause neurologic problems. And she was diagnosed with chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. So basically, that's where your body attacks your nerves.
That's an immune disorder known to develop after other vaccinations, too, and is reported in other COVID vaccine recipients after Maddie. Today, Maddie is still using a wheelchair and a feeding tube. She can swallow small amounts of water and food, though it wreaks havoc with her stomach, so she's seeing a new specialist for that.
She's getting more feeling back in her, like in her legs, it's like moving down. At one point, she couldn't even hold up her neck. She can hold up her neck now.
In small advances, DeGary says there's hope Maddie will eventually recover, though the family will never be the same. If you were to tell somebody what this is a story of, what's something you might say?
It's a story of opening up my eyes, seeing things. I trusted the government, I trusted doctors, I trusted hospitals. What I thought they were is not what they are.
We asked federal health officials if they agree with Pfizer's published claim that, quote, there were no vaccine-related serious adverse events in their study on children, but they declined to answer the question.